Okay, good to go. So thanks very much, Ashley, for the introduction. For anybody who doesn't know me, and it's great to see so many people from seemingly across Scotland on the webinar tonight, and that's always really encouraging. We're going to be looking at the whole farm plan and specifically habitat mapping and how to be compliant with the minimum standards. But my name's Alec Perry, and as Ashley said, I work at the Auchincruive office in Ayrshire in the southwest, but have previously done a stint in the Highlands from Kintyre myself. We have a farm on the Kintyre Peninsula, and generally worked across Scotland as and when the need arises. So great to see some familiar faces in the chat and in the attendees list tonight. Okay, so just going to get kicked off with a kind of broad overview of what the biodiversity auditing entails. So you'll all be familiar with the kind of broad purpose of the whole farm plan, but with regards to the biodiversity auditing, Scottish Government has decided that it's really important for them to have an inventory of different habitats across the farmed landscape in Scotland. And the reason for this is to influence future funding. We need to be able to take a strategic view of what's being funded and where and what kind of condition those habitats are in. So tonight we're going to be looking at the various different habitats that we've been asked to map on our farms, and you'll have until 2028 to complete this. Although I imagine if you're on this webinar, you're maybe already thinking far ahead, and you'll be looking to do this in terms of ticking your compliance for next year, which is great. We'll cover a couple of different methods that are available to meet compliance, and then I'll take a look at the ELPIS mapping system that's available, and I'll also show you an example of one that I've previously done. So in terms of meeting the minimum standard, all farmers in Scotland, all crofters in Scotland that receive basic payment are going to be expected to create a habitats map. And that habitats map must include all permanent ground that is on your IACs, as well as any additional white space that might meaningfully have a habitat included in that. And you must select at least one habitat from the whole farm plan habitat key. So I'll just show you that in a second. That best describes the majority of land cover in each field. Now that's not limiting. That's not to say that you can't have multiple habitats, but as a minimum standard for your habitats map, we want you to identify the dominant habitat, and where possible, depending on how you're recording that information, to comment on the condition of that habitat and whether or not it's species rich. And you'll then be expected during the IACS window in the spring of next year to submit your habitats map to the Rural Payments Inspection Division, if indeed you're deciding that that's going to be 2 of your 5 for next year. And the idea is that the habitats map will be built up over a number of years. So if you complete it this year, it'll be a 5-year period before you're expected to review it. But we would encourage you to review it regularly. It's very much a live document, and the more detail you're able to provide, obviously the better in terms of informing future funding and moving forward with your business. So I'm just going to move to the next slide here. For reference, a lot of what you're going to see this evening is already taken from the annexes on the Rural Payments Inspections Division's guidance on the website. So I would encourage you to, if you have any questions or want to do any additional reading, there's a lot of really good material on there. But here is just a slide showing the various different habitats that Scottish Government have asked for us to catalogue on our farm, to identify and where appropriate to allocate them to different land parcels. Now I'll just reiterate, because it does come up again and again. We're only looking for one habitat to be identified per land parcel, and like I say, white space where there's a meaningful habitat to be recorded, we're also looking to see that included as well. Okie doke. So we'll just move on to the first of these habitats. I should say that not every habitat on this list will be included in the webinar tonight. I trust that the majority of farmers will be familiar with what a hedge or a line of trees or a dry stone dike are. We all know what a water margin is, but for some of these more intricate habitats, there's a little bit of overlap. There's a little bit of grey area with regards to what should and shouldn't be included. So we'll have a bit of a discussion about it, and I'll welcome any questions at the end. Okay. So starting off with cropland, and I'll just say the intention of tonight, or the one thing that I want you to take away from the webinar, is that this can be as straightforward and as simple as you like it to be. It can be as complicated as you would like it to be. And once we've been through the different habitat categories, I'll talk a little bit about the various options that we've got as well. Obviously, I'm going to do the LPID mapping with you towards the end of the webinar, but any hand-drawn paper map is absolutely fine in terms of meeting the compliance standards. And there's also the likes of Nature Scott's Biodiversity app, which is expected to launch in the spring of next year. So there's a variety of different options when we're looking to complete this. Okay, so arable ground, as straightforward as it sounds. So all land that is being used for arable crop production, and that includes your fruits, vegetables, and fallow. So if there's an arable crop in there, if we're looking at either spring or winter crops, it could be barley, it could be wheat, it could be potatoes, it could be any number of vegetable crops, it could be fallow, depending on what you're doing with your field at any given time. It's also worth saying here, it is a question that I get occasionally. The purpose of the map is to provide a snapshot, so don't worry too much if the habitat changes year on year. If you have arable ground that later becomes grassland and becomes more permanent, that's absolutely not a problem. I should also say that ARPID are not looking to penalise people for getting their habitats wrong on their maps. Obviously, we would encourage people to be as accurate as they possibly can be, but we understand that there's a bit of grey area with some of these habitats, and we don't want people to feel pressured to get it absolutely right. There's certainly not going to be any penalties associated with identifying anything wrong. Okay. And then managed crops for nature. So when we're talking about managed crops for nature, we're really looking at things like your wild bird cover crops, your green manure crops. These are options that will be familiar to people, particularly if they're involved in the Agri-Environment Climate Scheme or some kind of comparative scheme. So absolutely, like I say, managed crops for nature as opposed to domestic use or for the likes of stock feed. And then field margins, as straightforward as it sounds, so land adjacent arable crops. And we're looking for areas that have a particular benefit for biodiversity. So anything from grass margins to species-rich margins to beetle banks could feasibly be included in field margins. Okay. And moving on to grassland, grassland tends to be the area where we get the most discussion when we give these presentations. And you'll see here, this is where the grey area really does start to come in. So improved grassland. Overwhelmingly, when I'm talking about improved grassland, and hopefully some of these pictures will be able to give a visual representation of what we're looking for, but we're really looking for productive ryegrass fields. These are the fields that you're going to be cutting for silage. These are the fields that you're heavily stocked with livestock. These will be the areas where you're undertaking applications of inorganic and organic fertilizers for the purpose of improving it and maintaining productive activity. So if in doubt, if you can top it, if you can cut it, if you're taking a crop of silage from it, I would be inclined to call it improved grassland. Okay. And then we have the likes of semi-improved grassland. Now, semi-improved grassland, like I say, this is where it gets a little more complicated. We're expecting to see more and more native species coming into the mix. There might be elements of Scottish native wildflower, and these will be areas that are less likely to be improved throughout the calendar year. So we want to see a reduction in conventional species, and these will be where your more native species come in. And then number 3 here is your unimproved grassland. And overwhelmingly, when I'm talking about unimproved grassland, I'm really talking about your species-rich grasslands, your semi-natural habitats, where there's little to no inorganic fertilizer being applied. There's little to no improvement being undertaken on this ground. There is a bit of discrepancy here, so you'll notice that this excludes grazed macar and areas above the hill dike. So there will be some people on tonight who might be inclined to include some of their upland grazed pastures, but you'll see in a little bit that does fall under another category here. But as a general rule of thumb, if you're for example, in an Agri-Environment Climate Scheme contract, you'll already be familiar with the areas where you've got these Scottish native wildflowers, for example, and these should be well known to the majority of you tonight. And then wet grassland. Now, I have a bit of a bugbear with wet grassland because depending on the time of year, you might be inclined to suggest that some of your grassland is wet. What we're really looking for here is, as it says, wet or marshy ground that's used for grazing with flowering species, but not typically dominated by soft rush. And we will come on to that. There is a difference to be made there. But yes, this is for anybody who was in RP in the past, rural priorities. This would be your wet grassland for waders, for example. And then rush pasture, as it suggests, every farm in Scotland, with the odd exception, will have an area of rush pasture somewhere. Even if it's not on your own farm, you'll be able to look across the field boundary, and I'm sure you'll be able to find somewhere. These are overwhelmingly the areas where you've got your soft and spiked rush. These will be areas where draining, for example, just isn't feasible, and these will be areas where the amount of productive ryegrass, for example, really starts to taper off. And again, these will be the areas that are of particular use for your ground nesting wading birds. So again, if you're involved in EECs, many of you will be familiar with where these areas are. Okay. So a little bit of crossover here because I appreciate that wet grassland and rush pasture can fall under the category of wetlands depending on the discussion that we're having. But when we're talking about wetlands here, and granted ponds and lochs is not a wetland as such, but we want to be able to capture the water environment. It's really important in terms of biodiversity value in Scotland. So ideally, we're looking to capture ponds, lochs, and you'll see it mentions scrapes there as well. So if you're so inclined, then by all means, I'll show you how to add point features onto your maps in a little bit here. But yes, we're looking to categorize the open water environment, and this is what we're hoping to achieve. Okay, so wetlands, ideally wetlands that are too wet for livestock. So we're looking for swamps, we're looking for reed beds, we're looking for areas that we wouldn't automatically assume it was okay to put livestock in. And that's how we distinguish the wetlands for the whole farm plan with the areas of wet grassland and rush pasture. So if in doubt, and this is just my approach, I do tend to favour, if there's ever a question about how improved the area is, I do tend to err on the side of it being generally improved. Just because we want to be able to maintain access and be able to undertake action across this land, and we don't want to be giving the impression that we have areas in Scotland where there's minimal agricultural activity on the go. And you never know, 5 years down the line, a lot of policy could look very different, and a lot of our options in terms of management could also look very different. Okay, so water management, water margins, sorry. Water margins, just as it sounds, we're looking to categorize and catalog the water environment, and to do that, we need to know about open ditch habitats. So ditches, burns, rivers, ponds, lochs, lochans, you name it, it can be categorized, and that can include, so in the case of water margins, fenced off areas where you've made a conscious effort to separate it from agricultural activity, whether that's arable or whether that's grazing livestock, or it could be an unfenced area as well. Okay, so moving on to woodlands. Conifer plantation. And apologies, some of these photos I appreciate are not typical of the Scottish farm, but they do help to get the point across quite nicely. So we're looking for conifer trees, excluding Scots pine within this category. And if in doubt, there's a range of support available through the FAS website to help identify and delineate these habitats. So we'll move on to the next one. Natural woodland. So woodlands that are generally dominated by native species. So it's identifying Scots pine in here, along with birch, oak, ash, hazel, and rowan. So we would expect to see fewer than 50% non-native species like your sycamore and your beech in these environments. And then your mixed woodland, so this is where your non-native species will come into play. So areas where you know that you've got sycamore, beech, a mix of non-native species, and can include conifer species, but again, there's that 50% threshold that we're looking for. And then wood pasture. Appreciate not a lot of areas in Scotland will have wood pasture. The kind of typical image for wood pasture in Scotland is your kind of extensive estate managed parkland habitat. But it will be applicable to some, and it's a really important habitat in its own right. So where we can identify those kind of areas of ancient wood pasture, this is exactly where we would be expecting them to fall under. And then scrub. So appreciate scrub is a bit of a catch-all, and thicket. These could coincide with the areas of BPS ineligible areas that you have on your farm, although not always. And I don't want to suggest that these areas are of reduced agricultural importance. It may very well be possible on your farm to graze these areas. But these are areas where you have a variety of gorse, broom, hawthorn. You can see there's quite a list here of species that we'd be looking to categorise here. Important that this doesn't include species like rhododendrons, so there is a separate category for invasive and non-native species that I'll come to towards the end. And then coastal. So again, just because the habitats are included in the key does not mean that you should feel obligated to use them all. And I'm under no illusion, yes, the coastal habitats will be very important if you're in the north and the west of Scotland, but there will be some of these habitats that just aren't applicable to you. For a lot of our clients here in Ayrshire, I don't see ourselves needing to use these layers an awful lot, but appreciate that it will be important for some. So salt marshes, we're looking for these intertidal areas, this merse ground, where there's a really interesting mix of saltwater environment and coastal species. And then when we're looking at sand dunes, I don't know how many of you will be farming on sand dunes, but there'll be some out there. Where coastal sand hills, ridges, dunes, everybody here will have seen a sand dune, and everybody who is farming on one will know what that looks like. Grazed macker. Now we don't have any of this habitat of note here in Ayrshire, not that I'm aware of, but I appreciate it will be really important for a lot of folk in the north and the west. So, yep, we're looking for dune grasslands on calcium-rich soils, and that'll follow with an array of native flowering species, and can be really important for a range of west coast birds in particular. And then your cropped maca. I had a really hard time finding the appropriate photos for this habitat. So if anybody recognises these, they've come off of the Scottish Government website. But yep, we are looking to include maca that's rotationally cropped, and that can include the fallow areas that aren't grazed during spring and early summer. And then coastal heath. So we're looking at these kind of maritime cliff areas with herb-rich heath, and these will be influenced by salt spray and the coastal environment. And again, if that's applicable to you, you'll likely be able to identify it. But we're looking for sheepspit scabious, for example. That's a good indicator, and heather and other dwarf shrub species that can often be stunted by a kind of harsh coastal environment. And then on to uplands and peatlands. Now, this will be a big category for a lot of farmers in Scotland. And again, this is maybe where it gets a little bit more complicated. The upland mixed habitat, we're not looking for any one habitat in particular, but when we're dealing with larger land parcels, it's quite possible that there's going to be a variety of different habitats within one area. And if you're getting to the point where defining a dominant habitat becomes particularly difficult, then this is the habitats layer that we're looking to use. So it could include a mix of heath and bog type habitats. It could include upland grasslands, and there is the mention there towards the end of the descriptor that areas of peatland that are more than half a hectare must be mapped. But again, these are areas that you'll know yourself, understanding your farms as you do. And then peatlands. So peatlands, and these are areas that are quite easily defined and identified. So blanket bog, moorland bog habitats, lowland raised bog is what we're looking to capture here. So separate from the upland mixed habitat, where there's maybe a little bit more of a habitat diversity going on across the landscape. And then upland grasslands. So I mentioned in the grassland section that some farmers might feel that their grassland meets the kind of broad description of unimproved grazed grassland. But if it's beyond the dike line, as we like to say, if it's arguably part of the upland environment as opposed to the in-by, this is the category that we want to capture that in. And then heath. So land that's dominated by heather species. So it can be wet, dry, lowland heath. Again, participants of the Agri-Environment Climate Scheme who have undertaken moorland management may very well have had to provide a upland habitats or a moorland habitats map. And this will be very similar in that you'll be looking to identify areas of wet, dry, and lowland heath. And just a couple of potential indicator species there. So blaeberry, bell heather, and cross-leaved heath on wetter areas. And then there are a couple of other habitats that are of note in the process that I just want to flag. So bracken, absolutely a valuable habitat in and of itself in isolation, but there's no question that it's an invasive species. And important that we understand where it is in terms of its extent across the Scottish landscape. Highly unlikely that an entire land parcel will fall under this particular habitat, but if you feel so inclined as to include it in the habitat map, depending on the level of the level of detail that you want to provide, then absolutely, this is something that we're very interested to find out about. And then I've just I've said INS there for anybody who's not familiar. So that's invasive and non-native species. So we're really looking to understand the extent of rhododendron, Himalayan balsam, Japanese knotweed, for example, and get an idea of where in Scotland potential funding for treatment and control of that should be targeted. And there's another couple of examples there. So Japanese knotweed, giant hogweed, American skunk cabbage, and giant rhubarb. Okay. And so I've just come to the end of the categories that we have on the presentation tonight, but wanted to show an example of what my own habitat map looks like. So this is one I created for home. I'm very happy with it. In terms of meeting the requirements of the whole farm plan, I'm confident that it does that. Obviously, this is not on the ELPIS system, and it's not something that you'll be able to replicate yourself. We have our own in-house software for doing this. If anybody's interested in this, of course, you can seek consultant input. But this just quite nicely shows the level of detail that's required for the purposes of the whole farm plan. And what you can see here is that our farm, my farm, is dominated by improved grassland. That's the green hatching. And we have a field of arable ground just behind our cottage there in the centre of the farm. We also have an area of semi-improved grassland off to the western extent, and that we have a small area of quite easily defined wetland where there's no livestock entering and grazing. In terms of how I came to that decision, so as I said, that wetland area has total livestock exclusion, and we don't claim it for the purposes of basic payment, although it is part of the land parcel. And then the area of semi-improved grassland is actually an area where there's 5 World War II gun huts, and in terms of applying inorganic fertilizer, slurry, manure, it's quite difficult to move across that landscape. The topography is not good, and obviously the structures there would prohibit us from meaningfully improving it. So and if you were to walk that habitat, you would see that it's quite distinct from the rest of the land parcel. It might be a little difficult to make out, but there's also a water margin that shoots off from the centre of the farm, as well as one water margin which runs down the boundary with the wetland. I appreciate it's a little difficult to see, but I do find that this is quite a straightforward map, and just in terms of visualising what's required of you guys, this is what we're looking to achieve. Okay, so I've come to the end of the breakdown of the different habitats. If you want to just bear with me, Ashley, I'll maybe just get the mapping system loaded up, and we'll take a look at what it can do. But are there any questions?
Yeah, there's a few. The first one is referencing at the beginning when you were introducing the talk, you mentioned white space. You referred to white space. Now, Johnny's asked, is that the areas that you don't claim an IX? Just want to maybe clarify what white space is.
Yeah. So white space would be an area that is within your ownership that doesn't have a defined land parcel identifier associated with it. So there could very well be a stretch of land that you have that for whatever reason isn't fenced, but you know yourself that there's a distinct habitat there that it would be worthwhile incorporating into the map. When the guidance was first launched, I'll just go back to my own map. you might be able to see there's just a small slither of green land out the front of the house on our farm. And I did go back and forward about whether or not that was an area that was needed to be included. But really, we're looking to see those kind of more dynamic, semi-natural habitats that maybe they've fallen out of agricultural use over the years, but are still nonetheless interesting from a nature conservation perspective.
The next question is from Michelle, and she said, can I just upload a screenshot of the field from the Rural Payments website and tick the habitat box?
Oh, sorry, Ashley, say that again.
Can I upload a screenshot of the field from the Rural Payments website and tick the habitat box?
I would need to know exactly what that would look like to know whether or not that's the case. It might be by all means, if anybody wants to catch up with me after tonight, and I can maybe clarify some of those questions. Just in terms of what that would look like, I'm just struggling to know for certain.
Yeah, if you maybe send us an email with an example of what you mean or what it is that you would be doing, and then we'll let you know whether.
Yep, absolutely, no problem at all.
And then Jill has asked, what definition for perennial fruit, veg and herbs, food forests, permaculture guilds? Now, I would think that would just come under vegetables still. I mean, if you want to make it more complicated, you could break it up more, but
I
would come under the vegetable category.
I would be inclined to to stick that under vegetables and fruits. Yeah. So if we think back to one of the first slides that we had, the arable section. So including fruits, vegetables, and fallow. So if in doubt, that would be where I would be looking. Maybe it's worthwhile saying that a lot of work has gone into making the habitat mapping process as concise as it can be. But I have sympathy for a lot of people who say my habitat, the area that I'm thinking about managing, it doesn't quite fit into that category. All I would say there is that remember back that in terms of whether or not it is appropriate, the department are not looking to penalise people if they interpret your habitat differently.
Richard wants to know, does this have to be done for common grazings also?
So my understanding on the common grazings is that it doesn't. No. Actually, as it turns out, we don't have very many common grazings in the south of Scotland, or certainly not in Ayrshire. But my understanding is that it doesn't include that. Maybe you've had similar discussions, Ashley.
Yeah, they don't have to do it.
Yeah, perfect.
And then Jill has said that perennial veg are species rich, not tilled, but that's fine. You can, if you think that you have enough to put down as species rich grassland, then you can break your fields up. That's entirely up to you, but you're only required to capture the main, what they would class as the main habitat. So if you can break your own up if you want to, Jill, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah. And maybe, Jill, when I come on to the demonstration of the LPIS system, although I haven't discussed it in great detail here, there is a tab within the LPIS mapping system asking whether or not your habitat is considered nature rich. So that could be another way of capturing some of that information that you're interested in.
Just thinking about some other people that are on the call, going back to the common grazing question, common grazings don't have to, but if there's a sheep stock club, then they would have to do it. But just normal common grazing with, say, an eeks or even no eeks, they wouldn't have to.
Yeah. As a general rule of thumb, as well, it's maybe worth just reiterating that seasonal ground isn't something that we're looking to capture here. However, if you feel that, particularly in instances where you've had seasonal ground for a number of years and you're likely to continue having that for the foreseeable, you may very well want to capture that information, and that's absolutely fine.
That's the question so far. You can
Okay,
move on to the next bit.
Yep. So what I'll do is I'll just see if I can load up the system. So if you just bear with me. So I would assume the majority of businesses who are on tonight will be able to jump in to their own online account. But if in doubt, businesses that have their own agents will similarly be able to sit down with them and go through these maps. So don't feel like if this isn't the way that you want to do it, or if you don't have immediate access, there will be options out there to get yourself online. And I'll maybe just share my screen now, Ashley, just in terms of showing what this looks like. Okay, so can everybody make that out? Can you see that okay, Ashley?
Yes.
Yeah, okie doke. So all I've done here is loaded onto the Scottish Government's mapping portal. And you can see here that the business has its own BRN, and there's the relevant location code. And there's the view option here. Now, if I just click that, it will take me to the mapping system that we would typically look at when we're doing our annual returns, our single application forms. But for the purposes of the habitats map, what I want to do is I want to go to the small actions button here. And then you'll see that you have the option to create a bespoke map, to edit parcels and ineligible features. But the one that we're particularly interested in is editing habitats. So if I just go ahead and click that. Right. Oh, and as it turns out, I don't know if you're able to make that out, but there's the 5 gun huts that I was previously talking about on my map. I'll just zoom out a little, and hopefully that'll give you a sense of perspective. It does take a little bit of getting used to this mapping system, and I'm still learning with it every day. But we'll just go through what some of these layers mean, what some of the options that are available to you mean. And by all means, if anybody's got any questions, drop them in the chat. And if I can't answer them tonight, we will make a point of coming back to you. So
Alec,
you'll see.
I was just going to jump in there and say that there are tutorials on the Rural Payments website that kind of give introductions to how to use the mapping system in general. So Alec's just going to be showing you how to update the habitats specifically for the Bull Farm plan. But if anybody wants to know where to find the other videos that they have, just get in touch and we'll point you in the right direction.
Okay, so you'll see here, this is just the home page, your kind of baseline page for when you open it up. And you'll see here, there's a list of the different land parcel identifiers that are associated with the business. So this is my own farm at home. We'll make our way through completing the habitats map, and in terms of meeting the minimum standards anyway, and we'll see what that ends up looking like. So like I say, we've got the parcels information here, and then we've got our habitats proposals. So the habitats proposals is where the layers that we are going to allocate end up going on the mapping system. So right now, we can see the F bound, which is just the farm boundary layer that every business should have when it opens up the relevant habitats layer. And you can see there that the total area is just over 66 hectares. I'll come back to that in a little bit, but if we move over to the layers section, you'll see a variety of different options. So we've got the aerial photography layer. I quite like working in the OS layer, and depending on what kind of mapping projects I'm on. Although for the purposes of this, I think I'll leave it on aerial. And then we've got the transparency of each of the layers that are active at any one time. So land parcels and features. And then you'll see here we've got individual layers for each of the different categories that was covered in the presentation. Also, towards the bottom here, you'll see that the master map is active. And if we just open that up, you'll see that these two areas here are particularly useful. So I'll come back to them, but we've got master map layers for areas within land parcels and then linear features. So that might be your ditches, your dry stone dikes, your hedges, although we have very few of them on the farm. And then if for whatever reason you wanted to query or search for a layer that was already put on the system, this is where you would be able to do that. However, for the functions for the purposes of tonight, we don't need to focus too much on that. And then I'll just switch back to the habitats proposal. And then along the top here, you can see that we've got a variety of different options. So there's the identify tool, and you'll see if I click on that, it'll highlight itself on the toolbar here, and I can click on various different areas of the farm layer to bring up its geography, its layout, and make changes. Oh, clearly done something there though. Switch that off. Then moving along here, if you ever move without out with the area on the mapping system, the home button will bring you back, and then you've got your zoom in and zoom out features, as well as your previous views, and if you want to move to something that you've already done after having moved back. There's also the functions here to measure lengths and areas, and there's a range of other smaller options that are perhaps less relevant. But if, for example, you wanted to export the map once you've got it done, there's an option here. For the purposes of tonight, what we want to do is we want to just get rid of that. That's maybe why my farm's coming up in white. For the purposes of tonight, what we want to do is we want to be able to identify and allocate habitats to each of these land parcels. So I'm just going to cover very quickly what the options are to do that. So you'll see here we've got options for selecting habitats. So if there were already habitats present on the map, this would be the function for me to click on them and to select them. However, if we wanted to create a new habitat, which is what we want to do, it's this function here. I'm conscious that perhaps it's a little difficult to see on folks' screens, but hopefully you're able to follow me along. So we are looking to create a new habitat. Equally, we could be looking to create a new linear feature, or we could be looking to create a new point habitat. So in reference to some of those invasive non-native species that we might want to capture on the map. And then there's a variety of options along here to reshape the topology of a given land parcel, to split a feature if we feel that that's something that we want to do, as well as to merge with adjacent features. And I'll cover that in just a little minute. And then, of course, if we create a layer that we then decide that we want to get rid of, there's the option to delete. Okay, so just, I know this is a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but what we are wanting to do is we're wanting to create a new proposal. And like I say, the habitats layer is the only one that's currently active. So what we want to do is we want to tell the system that we are looking to create a new habitat. So by clicking on the new habitat option, you'll see a range of things have just happened here. So it's asking us to confirm whether or not we mean to do what we're doing. And then there's a variety of different options here. Say, for example, we wanted to make a land parcel smaller. There's options to erase the nodes that have been highlighted along this parcel here. So we could activate that, and we could start rubbing out these points, and the geometry of that shape would adjust itself accordingly. Now, there's a lot of options here, and I don't want to distract from that. So what we'll do is we're going to allocate a habitat that meets the minimum standards. So if you remember, we only need to identify one dominant habitat type, and so we've activated the create habitat layer, and then what we have to do is, and this feature will move depending on the number of options that become available, depending on what you want to do. But we generally want to be constructing a polygon. So what we're telling it is that in addition to the farm boundaries layer on the top left-hand side, that we're also looking to create something new. And by clicking that, we get the option to add candidates, add to construction, and cut. So for what we're trying to do today, we're going to add to construction. There we go. Sometimes it can be a wee bit temperamental, but you'll see that in doing that, we've highlighted the single LPID that we're particularly interested in, and we then. Oh, sorry, Ashley, I've got it set up, and your face is covering the OK box here. We then want to hit the OK box. And you'll see here that it's activated the geometry around the shape. So if now I wanted to jump on and say, well, actually, I don't want this land parcel to encompass the gun huts on the top half of the land parcel here, I could maneuver these points to exclude them from what we're about to do. But again, for the purposes of meeting those minimum standards, we want to put in some details for the area that we've identified here on the bottom right-hand side. So this is quite important. The notes section here, we always want to put in some kind of description for the habitat that we've identified, and it will trigger a validation error if the description isn't particularly detailed enough. I think you need to have a minimum of 10 characters. So I might be inclined just to say permanent grassland, and because this is a new land parcel that we've just identified, it automatically knows that it's a new request, and then, like I say, it'll ask whether or not it's nature rich, and what that generally means in my discussions of how to use this is whether or not the habitat is in a semi-natural condition, and whether or not it's a kind of measurement of its overall condition as well. So in this particular instance, this is a field of improved grassland. It's routinely grazed by dairy cattle. Yes, there's some lovely oyster catchers on it, and there is that nice pocket of wetland down on the far western end of it. But for the purposes of this, we're going to say that it's not nature rich. And then it'll ask us roughly what is the habitat coverage like within that land parcel. So this is where your opportunity is to say, well, yes, I know I've identified the whole land parcel, but it's not all it's not all improved grassland. You know, there could be something in there. It is feasible that between 70 and 90% of the land parcel might fall into that category. So that would be where we would be capturing that. Currently, the gross area is saying 0, but you'll see that once we've activated this parcel, it will calculate the total area of the new geometry. And then you'll see here a breakdown of the habitats that we've covered in today's presentation. So for the purposes of this, and because it's accurate, we're going to say that this is improved grassland. And then we're going to hit confirm. And what that will do is you'll see that the land parcel has been color coordinated in line with the improved pasture layer. So that's broadly what that'll look like. Now, in terms of how do we make this process relatively straightforward, I always like being able to go field by field when I'm doing these kind of maps. I think that it's valuable to have that flexibility of being able to select a single land parcel. However, if, for example, we have multiple land parcels that are adjacent one another, where the habitat is consistent throughout, we can select multiple land parcels. So we'll just do that now. And we're going back up to the new habitat feature. And again, we've activated a range of different options here. And we're looking to construct polygons. And if I just hold the Shift key, we should be able to select multiple land parcels. For the sake of trying it again, I'll give it another go, and we'll maybe select just a couple fewer land parcels.
Go through a couple of questions while you're
Yeah,
sorting.
sure.
So one of them is, when identifying linear features, are these automatically measured on the system?
So once you've drawn in the feature, it will give it a length, if that's what you're looking to identify. Yep. You can also use within the layers section. I'll show you that this now. Within the layers section, you can activate the master map for habitats. You can also activate the master map for lines, and depending on which features you have active at one given time, it'll highlight any linear features that it thinks is of particular interest. Let's see, is there a good example of that? I might just switch off a couple of these layers. Having too many on can sometimes be an issue. I'll leave the grassland on. I'll switch off cropland. So let's see. This could turn the entire screen red. There we go. So you'll see there that what it's done is it's highlighted any linear feature that you might want to draw along. So more often than not, it'll highlight fence lines and boundaries. But also, if we zoom in there, you'll see that it'll go right down to the banking of this water body. So this is the Machrihanish water for anybody who knows this part of the world. And if I wanted to, I could then switch on the layer here for a new linear habitat, and I could draw along the boundaries of this. I could also, just recognizing how difficult it can be sometimes to be accurate, there are options to activate the snapping tool for visible layers. And what that will allow us to do, if I activate the snap and the tracing tool, it should allow me to be reasonably accurate with the tool here. And just a top tip, I wouldn't try and draw in any wild shape too quickly. The snapping tool does take a little bit of time, but you'll see that it is generating its own nodes, and that's it recognizing that there's a change in the shape layout. And in doing this, it means that it should snap fairly tightly to whatever layer you're drawing on. In this particular instance, we don't own this side of the road. This isn't a habitat that I would be inclined to map, but it's just an example of something that you could do. And if I, for example, wanted to, I could add that shape now by writing in some notes here, activating the habitat type, and then it will bring up a range of linear features. So your dry stone dikes, your field margins, your hedges, your rivers and streams. And it would ask me again, is it nature rich? And if I were to hit to say yes, then it would generate a length, and that layer would come up here alongside the field boundaries and the improved grassland that we drew. Okay.
Do you want me to keep going with questions, or do you want to return?
Yeah, please. Just keep going, Ashley. Yeah.
Yeah. So, is there any chance that the mapping system is going to be made easier to use as time goes on, or is this as good as it's going to get?
So from the conversations that we're having, and there is an opportunity to provide feedback on how people are getting on with it. My understanding is that there will be continual development of it, and they are really interested to make this as user friendly as it possibly can be. We're in the very kind of early stages of it now. I wouldn't be surprised if there are new features and improved usability as time goes on. But I'm not privy to many of those discussions, so I couldn't honestly say too much.
But there are other ways to complete this, which you're going to touch on later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
Sorry, on you go.
actually, the next one was just saying, will we get the recording because my map isn't doing what you're doing? Yes, we
Right.
will. We'll send out a
Okay.
recording, and you might be able to zoom in then and see more
Yeah.
what's going on. But the recording won't be out until in the new year.
Yeah.
Because
And like I say,
yeah.
I appreciate that this is a little bit difficult to watch and take all in the time that we've got, but I'm more than happy to run through this with anybody who's got any particular questions, maybe something that's quite farm specific. If you want to get in touch, that's absolutely fine. I do want to show the double selection of land parcels before we finish up. So I'll just move back to that. But if there are other questions, Ashley, please just fire on.
By updating the land parcels with the main habitats on your own rural payments map, is that all that is needed to be compliant, or do we need to upload or confirm the completing of this task elsewhere?
So the habitats map is what. So I'll just cover something that may be quite important and could catch some people out when it comes to IACS time next year. So when you're completing your subsidy claim next year, you will be asked in some form or another. We don't know quite what it's going to look like yet, but you will be asked which of the 2 of the 5 of the whole farm plan components are you have you committed yourself to. If you identify yourself as having done the habitats map, you will be asked to upload a copy of it with the submission of your application. This is so unique for the whole farm plan. The rest of it can be retained and requested upon inspection, if you ever do get an inspection. With using the LPIS system, the benefit is that this is live, and you can go on and change it whenever you like. But it's already built into the department system. So in theory, once it's completed, once it's finished, once it's validated, and I'll show you how to do that, it should be on the system, and shouldn't be something that you need to upload when you're doing your application next year.
And then the other question is there a benefit to adding in areas of active coastal erosion?
It's a point. It's a question. Actually, I've had something very similar just this week. It's something that I would like, as somebody who does a lot of conservation work, I'd be really interested to know where those areas are. So it's certainly something that if you knew there was a particular area where there was a real issue, there's nothing stopping you from putting in a point feature on your map, and identifying it as such. So yeah, that's absolutely the kind of information that we're looking to see.
That's all the questions up to now.
Good stuff. Right, let's see if I can make. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Fantastic. So you can see now the mapping system has highlighted the geometry that we've just highlighted, and you can see that it's crossing over both of the land parcels. So if I then
Did you do anything different there, or was it just you trying the same thing again?
yeah, sometimes the system's just a little temperamental, but that was just me doing the same thing. And we're going to call this improved grassland as well, and we're going to hit confirm, and that should generate a new land parcel, sorry, a new layer up here. It should give it its own unique code, so that 821.28, and you'll get the relevant information for it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to purposefully create a validation error just so that you see what that looks like, and then we'll move on to validating it, and show you what it looks like when we move to finish the map. So let's just, for a bit of variety, we're going to create a new habitat, and it's going to be this field here, which is arable. And we're going to hit add to construction, and we're going to hit OK. And again, the geometry highlights itself. Worth saying that if for whatever reason there's a break in the geometry, so I've been able to highlight multiple land parcels at once. I couldn't do that if there was something in between the two of them. It just wouldn't allow me to do that. So you can see that there's a track between the two areas that I've previously coloured in here. If I had tried to select those two land parcels independent of any other land parcel, it wouldn't have worked, and it's just because the system can't reconcile the change in the geometry there. This area is in arable, so we'll put down spring wheat. And again, it's not particularly nature rich. The area does take up about 90% of the land parcel, and we'll just say that it's arable. Oh, that land part, the layer itself isn't particularly colourful, but it is actually highlighting there. Now, if I remove the spring wheat from the notes there and hit OK, what I'm hoping to see is, so when we get to the point where your map is fully complete, you've identified your habitats across your different land parcels, and you know that you want to complete your map, we need to validate the map to ensure that the information that we've put in reconciles with the system, and that it's not flagging up any particular errors. So you've not identified a habitat that sits outside you've not identified a habitat that crosses over any boundaries that it shouldn't be, and that there isn't any areas where there's overlap between two different habitats, for example. So we can then hit validate all. And if we just give it a minute, it will generate a report based on what we've done.
It's always really slow, by the way, so if you're using it, you have to put up with the pace of it. Someone's asked, once you've done this, have you got time to go through adding a point feature?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do that. We'll do that just now. So there aren't really, well, what we could do is say we want to add the point feature in. So say, for example, I want to highlight one of these huts here. Not that it's a particularly interesting habitat, but just for the interest of what we're doing here, you'll see that there's a yellow marker there on the map now. So again, just like any layer feature that we want to create, it's asking us for some information on what we've highlighted. So it's a gun hut, for example. It is not nature rich, although in terms of examples of what could be considered nature rich, I've seen some really nice examples of some lichens, some mosses that have been identified on some of the kind of rocky or screes in our moorland habitats. That would be a really interesting point feature. Somebody brought up earlier instances of coastal erosion. Again, that might be something that I want to highlight. Obviously, it's not something that's nature rich, but it would be a point of interest that we would like to see included. And then it'll ask here, is it a general point feature or is it an invasive non-native species? This is a general point. And then if I click yes, it will give the point feature its own unique code, so 1164, and you'll see it's been added to the list of the habitats that we've created here. Okay. So that's mapping 101. And I think I did hit the validate option there. And what I was expecting it to do was to bring up a report telling me off or giving me a warning for having not activated or having not put in the correct notes into the arable area. So, like I say, if you identify an area and you don't include the minimum 10 characters, it'll ask you why you haven't done that. For whatever reason, it doesn't seem to be doing that tonight. But that is what I would expect to happen, and you will get a report highlighting the validation error. And there are two broad kinds of validation errors. There are mandatory errors, which have to be dealt with for you to finish the project, and there are advisory errors, which can be ignored, but it's always good to address these wherever possible. Okay. Sorry, was that another question just come in, Ashley?
There's two come in since we've been chatting there. So Jasmine's asked, what is meant by nature rich?
So when I'm talking about whether or not a habitat is nature rich in the context of the whole farm plan, what I'm generally meaning is it a semi-natural habitat? So is it an area of species-rich grassland, for example? Is it a particularly diverse area of wetland? We're just trying to differentiate between areas of improved grassland or arable areas which are quite intensively managed and areas which are less intensively managed. But again, if you're using, for example, the NatureScope Biodiversity app, one of the features of it that is really quite good is that in addition to identifying habitats at field scale or linear features or point features, it will also ask you a series of questions about the condition of those habitats. So when we're talking about the nature richness of it, the department is just trying to gauge how valuable the habitat is.
And Siobhan has asked, can you change the habitat once you have ticked OK? And then once you have clicked validate, is it set in stone?
So this is a live document, so you should be able to come in and make changes as and when you like. The purpose of creating the map is just to provide yourself that snapshot in time. And apologies, it's not quite doing what I thought I'd wanted it to do. Obviously, it's not showing very much information here. But yes, we're looking to show that that snapshot in time. And if habitats change, you can absolutely change them as well. So maybe what we can do just to demonstrate that, if I go on here and we create, oh, must still have the point feature on. So if I go on and create, for example, a new habitat, let's say in this field here. And this is a bit of a mad scenario, but I'm going to say that this particular habitat is peatland. In fact, let's not choose peatland. Let's say that it's semi-improved grassland, and let's actually say that it is nature rich. Okay, so you can see the semi-rich habitat that we've just added there. But if over time you decide that actually that habitat's not semi-rich anymore, there's absolutely nothing stopping you from hitting the delete button. It will ask you why you want to delete a given habitat. And like with everything else, you'll be asked to put in a note. So I might just say that over time we have completed an environmental impact assessment on this ground, and we're going to take the decision to improve it. And once I've put in a reason for that, I can hit OK, and it will remove the land parcel and allow me to allocate something different.
There's another question again asking, once the map's complete, do you need to print it, or because it's on RPNS, will the department know it's there?
So it should automatically upload to the online mapping system, provided you validate and you finish the map.
Someone has asked, once they've informed rural payments what they've got, can they do the map for them? So I'm assuming that means if she gives a list of the habitats written
Yeah,
down on the paper map, will they then do this?
yeah,
This side?
although I've spent a bit of time today, obviously discussing how to map the habitats, there is nothing. So depending on which local RPID office you're working with, some of them have suggested that they'd actually be quite happy to receive a list of the LPID numbers for your different land parcels, and you can just provide them a list of corresponding dominant habitats, and that will satisfy the requirement. So if mapping really isn't your thing, you can still satisfy the requirement of the whole farm plan through that way. But there is a danger there that different offices will take a slightly different approach. So so do get in touch with your local office if you're thinking of doing that in the first instance.
And another question was, does nature rich include wildlife, such as lapwings and curlews?
So does it include wildlife? I This is just my personal preference. I wouldn't include your species like your lapwing, your curlew, your oyster catcher. I recognise that they are national priority species in Scotland, but if that was the case, and if you were including them as nature rich, I might feel inclined to actually make my improved pasture nature rich. Um, it's not evident from this map, but the sand dunes here are absolutely filled with oyster catcher seasonally. In fact, it's the mascot for one of our local golf courses in Kintyre. The landscape is just absolutely filled with them. But I don't think I could honestly say on my dairy farm that my improved grassland was nature rich. So that's just my own personal feeling. I would be inclined to steer away from that.
That's all the questions so far.
All right. And there we go. Actually, you'll see all I had to do was to move back to the parcel breakdown. So you'll see here that um, there are three validation errors that have been raised through the mapping. Some of them I expected. So there's one here, 1164. So you must enter at least 10 characters in the notes for the habitat that we created. So if I go back to habitat 1164 on the proposal here, and that's the point that we put in, you'll see that I didn't satisfy the character limit for that. So I could just put in World War II gun huts. I can tick that off to say that that's it done. And then if I go back here, I can hit validate again. And you'll see that instead of three, it's raised two errors. So the other two here is telling me that I need to provide descriptions of the changes in the habitats. So if I click on this here, there must be something that I've missed out. So again, I created this land parcel without putting any notes in at all, and that's something that the system wouldn't allow me to do and complete the map. So again, improved grassland. So I appreciate there's a lot to it. There's a lot of steps, and it is a bit of a learning curve. But if you're patient and you have the time, it does produce a map that is compliant with the minimum standards, and it does automatically upload itself onto the system, which is quite nice that you can finish the project and walk away and know that it's done.
If you want to print the map, how would you print the map?
How would you do that?
That's
Yep,
another
hold on
question.
just 1 second. So let me just validate that again. Right, and you can see that there are no validation errors raised. And if you click on the info button there, it'll just give you a breakdown of the different habitats, and it'll clear whether or not they've been successfully validated. Okay, and if you wanted to export your map, you would click here to export your map. And depending on how long it takes, it can take a little while. So I'm maybe not going to sit and wait for it. But oh, there we go. And what that should have done is it will give me an overview map. Oh, it must be. There must be something in the mapping system that it didn't quite like there, but you'll see. So what that should have done is it should have highlighted the maps, that the areas that we just highlighted. Let me just try and see if it's present in the full set of maps. No, no, that's really odd. Bear with me, and I'll try one more time. No, there's just the shape files.
Maybe make a note of that to let them know.
Yeah. I can follow up with anybody who wants to see what they look like. But they should in theory generate your map as it appears here. And once I'll just to finish off. So we've validated these areas now. So I could jump on here and I could say that we're finished. Importantly, by saying that we're finished doesn't mean that we're submitting it. We can get hopefully this will work here if I ask for a print preview. Second time lucky. And it's at that point that if I hit that finish there, it would upload those files. Oh, there we go. So this looks more promising. What you'll also get with your map. So there's your land parcels that are included, and there's a breakdown of the different habitats that we've put in, and in which counter they're present, and the relevant codes for them as well. So just bear that in mind. If anybody would prefer a list as opposed to a map, if you're so inclined, you will generate that. And oh. And hopefully, yes, there we go. And so that's what it would look like if you were to go through the process of fully completing it. And you'll see it's got its own corresponding code for the points that we've created, and it will try and center on the topography that you've highlighted for the given habitats. Okay, so apologies. I know that was a lot to take in, and that was that will be a learning curve for a lot of people. Because I've already done my habitats map with our own internal mapping system, I don't want to be submitting this. However, if I hit finish there, I would be signifying to the department that these habitats are ready to be reviewed, if indeed we wanted to select that for the whole farm plan. I'll just shut that down there. And like I say, it's live and it will automatically save as we go. So don't worry, I haven't lost any of that. If I wanted to jump back on, it should in theory all still be there. Okay.
One last question
Yeah,
there.
sure.
how do you add a white space area? Can you ignore
Oh,
it if it's roads and buildings? And what about a garden you use for lambing problem cases?
oh, sorry, what was that last bit, Ashley?
What about a garden? So if you had a garden that's part of your croft or farm that you did use for
Yeah.
problem lambing cases.
Yep, yep. So again, I talked a little bit about the garden out the front of our house earlier. Where I've come down on is that that would form part of the domestic use as opposed to agricultural use. And I'd be inclined not to put our garden in. I certainly don't think the department are going to pull you up for that if you did that. And yeah, I can see a scenario where you might throw some pet lambs out into a patch of ground that it perhaps doesn't have its own land parcel identifier. And if you wanted to map that, absolutely no harm in doing that at all.
So that's all. That's
Yeah,
all.
that's the last question. Fantastic. And I'll maybe just move back to the presentation slides just to give us something different to look at.
We'll touch on the Nature Scout app as well.
Yeah, yeah. So as I said at the beginning here, um, the mapping system itself is not it's not one size fits all. In the same way that we have different calculators to do our carbon footprints, or we have different laboratories to test our soils, we have a range of options when we come to doing our mapping systems as well. So as I said at the beginning, there's absolutely nothing wrong with getting a paper map out and color coordinating with the habitats key in front of you. That's absolutely fine as long as the department can interpret what you've put on the page and meaningfully update it to the online system. That's absolutely fine. And yes, so. For those of you who aren't aware, and some of you might have been involved in the trials for it, NatureScot have been developing their own biodiversity app. I think I said earlier on that it's expected to launch in the spring of 2025. And we're not going to demonstrate it here today. I've seen it on and off. I think it's as far as I'm concerned, it does the job. It's fairly intuitive. It asks a lot of really interesting questions. The habitats map is one of the components of the whole farm plan where written in the guidance there is a suggestion that over time we're going to want to see more and more detail built into it. So if you can really get yourself accustomed to the technology of that and put in as much detail as early as you can, you're only putting yourself in a good footing for the future. And I showed you an example of the map that we had done for home at the end of the presentation. Again, any other mapping software is absolutely fine, provided that it matches the habitats key that's in front of us, and like I say, shows the dominant habitat in each of the land parcels, and a white space where that's appropriate. Um, I did miss one question there, Ashley. There was a question about how to map white space. So in the same way that you can draw a point onto the mapping system, you can also draw a polygon. And once you've drawn round your given feature, in the same way, it will flag up the same questions about whether or not it's what the dominant habitat type is, whether or not it's nature rich, and what the habitat extent is over that area. So it works on very much the same kind of principles.
There's one more question come in, but then I think we'll call it after that because it's
Sure.
half past. But question was, what if your land parcel is more than one habitat? How accurate do you have to be with sizes?
So, as a general rule of thumb, try and be as accurate as you can be, but remember that nobody at the department is going to penalise you for your interpretation of your own habitats. you know, we're really trying to establish this baseline with the habitat mapping. And yes, there might be more detail to come in the future. And yes, we might tighten up the level of scrutiny that we place on habitats and what is distinctly one habitat and what's distinctly another. But at this point, I wouldn't worry too much about that at all. I think it's good that you've shown a willingness to try and differentiate between those habitats, and as long as you can honestly say that you've had a good stab at it, I'd be quite happy.
Pretty well done then.
Oh, fantastic.
Good.
Well, listen, folks, thanks very much for joining us and listening to me rattle on for this last wee while. I hope that's been really helpful. I appreciate it's just an overview, and there's an awful lot more that we could have gone into. But like I say, if anybody's got any questions, please feel free to reach out to us either through Ashley or myself directly, and I'll be happy to have a chat with you.
Further up the chat as well, Jill shared a website that might be useful for people that are wanting to get into the nitty-gritty with picking the habitats and identifying species. And there are some farm advisory service events coming up in the new year. We're going to do farm walks and look at habitats, look at species, and they're spread all across the country, and there'll be some online ones too, so keep your eyes peeled for that too if that takes your interest. Other than that, yeah, as Alex said, send in any questions, and the FAS team will probably send out an evaluation form for you to fill in too, so if you could fill that in, that would be good. And we'll probably have more events like this in the future as it gets closer to IACs and people needing the whole farm plan done.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks very much.